Hello guys, Dwight here, and I'm back today, carrying on the discussion from yesterday, as I said I would, which is Duelyst as a viewer experience. Now, I kind of covered some ground on this yesterday, talking about RNG in the game and randomness and why that is a big draw as a viewer. People like watching people get mad, they like watching people get ruined by something completely out of their control. Like I say, it is quite enjoyable in a vicarious way. But the problem is that it's not very satisfying as a player. And like I said, I went into this in a lot of depth yesterday, so I'm not going to touch on it too much today. I just kind of wanted to have a starting point to kick off from, if you like. So, as a viewing experience right now, I feel Duelyst leaves a lot to be desired, and I think a lot of this is in the fact that the UI, as it is right now, while you're watching a stream, isn't the easiest to follow what's going on. Now, a lot of this is because obviously you can't see the cards. If you don't play the game, you don't really have any idea what those cards are doing. All you've got to go off of is like a pixelated sprite. Now, I'm not going to go into the art style in this video. It's kind of outside the scope of this. You either like the art style or you don't, and I don't really think changing the art style would really particularly help this. I just think that, as I say, if you've never played the game before, you're coming into it to watch a stream, you have absolutely no idea what's going on until you've played the game. And so while this is fine as someone who has played the game and enjoys the game, I can obviously watch another stream just fine and know exactly what every card does. But I've had a few people who come into my stream kind of ask me to mouse over the cards and things like that so that they have an idea of what it is I'm actually doing, rather than me just kind of flicking my mouse around and saying this is what I'm going to do, X, Y, Z, and so on. And so I'll kind of touch on this in a bit, that the kind of the clarifications that could be made to the game as a whole. Now, I think kind of changing the UI as a whole is kind of a bit of a waste of time. I think the UI is fine as a player. It's just that when we get to spectate mode and tournaments and things like that, then I think there could be things that could be introduced so that people coming to get an idea about the game or watch tournaments or whatever can follow it in a better fashion, and it will also help people outcasting the tournament as well. So that's kind of what I'll go into later. As in kind of a short aside, I just want to talk about like Duelyst's role and Twitch's role in the growth of Duelyst. And you're probably aware that recently Counterplay did a paid promotion where they paid like several top Hearthstone streamers to try out Duelyst for a certain amount of time, and did so in the hope that that would increase exposure of the game and you would draw a lot of new players in from that. Now, I followed this kind of closely, and I think that while the premise is a good one, because it gives the game a lot of exposure, obviously if you've got someone like Calento, for example, streaming Duelyst, who usually bring like 3,000 viewers across with him, which rockets Duelyst up the live games list on Twitch. People will find it a lot easier. They'll come and have a look at what's going on because it's got a lot of viewers and so on and so forth. However, the trend that I've noticed with this is that Calento, for example, might pull anything up to 15,000 concurrent viewers while playing Hearthstone. He swaps over to Duelyst and he could lose like 80% plus of his viewers. Part of this is because a lot of people will just want to watch him for Hearthstone. Obviously he's a very good Hearthstone player, that's the game that they play, the game they're into, that's the content they're interested in. But the other side to this is that even if Duelyst is a very good game, which obviously in my opinion it is, people who are watching it who can't follow it are going to lose interest very quickly. And not only that, the people that you are paying to promote the game have a very big vested interest in the success of Hearthstone and not so much in the success of its competitors. So if you are paying somebody who earns all of their money through Hearthstone and who loses 80% of their Twitch revenue by switching over to play another game, I don't see how you could ever kind of incentivize them to carry on playing this game unless Hearthstone was to fall off the edge of the planet. There are obviously like big variety streamers, so like Co and Lyric, just off the top of my head, who can kind of play any game and are obviously offered betas and things of big upcoming games so that they can publicise it that way, and it kind of works for both the game company and for the streamer because they get a lot of extra viewers, obviously because it's new and interesting, and the game company gets a lot of exposure through their like 20, 40,000 viewers or whatever it is they have. And so I can see this as kind of an idea that works in a similar vein, in that if you consider the average concurrent Twitch viewership of Duelyst is about 1 to 300 at any given time, then pulling in someone who brings across potentially 15,000 people with them is absolutely huge. 15,000 viewers would pretty much put Duelyst on the front page of Twitch at any given time. However, like I say, the caveat to that is that they are Hearthstone players, and because all of their kind of business, if you like, is tied up in Hearthstone, Duelyst is never going to be any more than a bit of an aside for them, rather. And if you were to then, like I say, have their viewership drop dramatically when they come over, then people will see that and think, well, why is this person who has like 10,000 plus viewers now only streaming to 2,000 when they swapped game? Is it because the game isn't very good, and so on? And so I think like the paid promotion, while on paper a good idea, kind of could backfire a bit, and it's something that should be considered carefully in future, as opposed to growing the community kind of organically as it is. So moving on from that, like I say, I don't think it's the easiest game to watch on Twitch from a streamer perspective. I think our biggest streamers only pull in up to like 200 viewers at a time, and I think kind of relaying the game and making the game more clear to watch is the responsibility of the streamers to a degree. Like, we can mouse over the cards, we can explain everything it is that we're going to do, obviously people can ask questions, we can tell them, so on and so forth. So kind of, now I've talked about Twitch and everything else, I'm going to move on to kind of spectator mode and that side of things, and tournaments and so on. So I think the tournament scene in Duelyst is actually very strong. We have at least two rather big tournaments every week, and kind of meta calls aside and everyone being bored of Vitruvian, I think that having so many tournaments so regularly with so many players is very, very good for the game, because if somebody goes into a tournament with a deck specifically to counter the meta, everyone sees it, thinks it's great, they go and build the deck themselves. If you have tournaments really like spread few and far between, then that kind of constant evolution of the metagame is stymied somewhat by the fact that people will just play what they know works best, obviously, as they do in pretty much any game. However, like I say, if you've got chances every week where people are coming in and saying, oh look, I know I'm going to be playing against a lot of X, I'm going to try this deck with these certain tech inclusions that maybe haven't been considered before, and that deck works out really well, then suddenly you have a really kind of rapidly cycling meta where everyone is trying to stay ahead of the game for tournament placings and everything else. And so I think that is very strong for the game. The problem we have is that tournament streamers right now and the casters for those tournaments have really rudimentary tools for going about casting those games. Generally it involves either watching a replay of someone on a friends list or watching their stream as they're streaming, which obviously shows their hand and has its own problems. And so I know spectator mode's in the work, it's on the product roadmap, it should be coming fairly soon along with an in-game tournament mode. The thing is that I think the spectator UI needs to be drastically different to the game UI, and I've kind of done a mock-up here that you can see. Okay, so I've drawn up like a really dodgy version of how I kind of envision changes we could make to spectator mode in Duelyst to make it a bit easier to follow. So obviously, first of all, Duelyst is played on a grid, and I think similar to chess, grid references could be incredibly useful to kind of follow where cards could be put and discuss where minions can be played or moved to and so on. So say here I am on the left, it's the first turn, and I could say obviously I'm going to move my general up to c3, and I'll probably play my 2-drop onto b4 to contest the mana tile at the top at a5 or something along those lines, where obviously I don't have much in the way of casting talent right now, but that's kind of how I envisage we would use those grid references to kind of better explain ourselves in terms of how it is we're going to go about things, or as a caster to explain like different scenarios in the game in an easy to follow way, as opposed to, well, I could play this minion to the left of my general or something like that. The other thing that I think could be incredibly useful is the player hands at the bottom. Again, my paint skills are absolutely terrible, so you'll have to excuse this somewhat, but we've got the old version of MacLeod Devourer set down there, and a True Strike as well, without the ×3 or whatever on the bottom, as obviously these are just copies from collection. What you would have then is you can see like the full hand of cards and what each of those cards do, as opposed to just seeing like the icon on the player's bar. And so as someone who is looking to learn the game or watch the game and wonder what a certain card might do, the information is there readily available to them, and it's much easier to kind of follow what plays could be made or theorise on your own plays. Also from like a casting perspective, it's much easier for you to say like, well, player 1 has these cards, player 2 has these cards. I expect with the board in this state that player 1 is going to play X, Y and Z, and player 2 then has this card to counter it as well. And so you kind of have that information, whereas in the current situation as it is right now, generally whoever is casting a tournament game only has the information of one player's deck. And that obviously makes their job very difficult, but also it's kind of unfair in the sense that you only see half of the game. And so by doing it like this, I think we could kind of mitigate that somewhat and have a better rather overview of the game as a whole, which makes for a more fulfilling experience when watching the game for a start. My final kind of change to this here, ignore my deck list on the right and everything else, it's just a very old image, is to have the minions, when you mouse over them it shows their stats on the board, and I think in a kind of spectator mode at the very least this should be permanent. So you can see the Arcane Spellbinder down there at the bottom right that has been chopped in from somewhere else, is showing that it's 7 attack, 9 health minion, and I see no reason why this information shouldn't be presented to the viewer all the time. It doesn't particularly flood the view, it doesn't clutter anything, it's just very, very clear information that they can use to follow the game better from there. And so on a very basic level, I think those are important changes that could be made to make the game easier to cast and easier to follow as like a recreational viewer, if you like. So just as an aside to this as well, I think we as a community have the opportunity, as we are a very young community, a very small community, we have the opportunity and kind of the responsibility to help Duelyst grow as a game as well. And something I noticed after the King of the Beta the other day was people complaining about the casting talent on offer. And you have to kind of bear in mind that this is a stream that goes out to 100 people or 200 people. Everyone who does it is a volunteer to start with, and the game is only in its infancy. You can't really expect that they're going to be world-class casters right out of the gate. So, I mean, if you look at League of Legends, which is now the biggest esport in the world, the most watched esport, the early broadcasts of that game were absolutely atrocious, like full-on cringeworthy in how bad they were. But look at the production value of the game now that it's had the proper backing, it's had the time to grow. The people who do the casting have had the time to gain expertise in a role that otherwise that they obviously would have been amateurs in. They're not going to have come in from, say, football or anything else. And so we kind of have to accept that these people are volunteering their own time and they're trying their hardest. I've tried casting before and it's certainly not easy. It's kind of not even that easy to make a video like this where you're kind of having to ramble on for 20 odd minutes or whatever, but it's even harder to sit down and talk about something in real time and kind of explore all the possibilities and know that if you miss anything, someone in Twitch chat is going to nail you to the wall for it because they've seen it. And so kind of we have to encourage people and make them want to come back and keep trying and keep giving up their time to make the tournament seem what it is. And so this is just, again, a bit of an aside that how I certainly think the game viewing experience could be better. I've outlined how it could be better, but I also think that we as members of the Duelyst community have a responsibility to make it better ourselves by providing more informative streams and like usurping the kind of limitations that are there at the moment, and also to encourage the members of the community that are actually trying and putting themselves out there to improve the broadcast quality to draw more people in. So hopefully, again, this has been an informative video. I was really pleased with the response to yesterday's video, and obviously if you like it, like, subscribe, leave any comments or feedback below. I don't mind constructive criticism by any means, and I will be back tomorrow with another video. Cheers.